I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I never expected to bury my child. It's the most unnatural thing in the world, standing beside the polished mahogany casket of your son, watching as they lower it into the ground while you remain above. Andrew was only 38. I am 62. This was not how it was supposed to be. The April rain fell in a steady drizzle as we huddled under black umbrellas at Greenwood Cemetery. I stood alone, separated from the other mourners by an invisible barrier of grief that no one dared cross. Across from me stood Olivia, my daughter-in-law, her perfect makeup unmarred by tears, her black Chanel dress more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral. She'd been married to Andrew for barely 3 years, yet somehow she'd become the center of this ghastly ceremony, while I, who had raised him alone after his father died, was relegated to the periphery. Mrs. White. A man in a somber suit approached me as the last of the mourners began drifting toward their cars. I'm Jeffrey Palmer from Palmer, Woodson & Hayes. I was Andrew's attorney. The reading of the will is scheduled to take place at the house in an hour. Your presence is requested. At the house? Today? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Isn't that rather soon? Mrs. Conrad, he began, using Olivia's preferred surname before correcting himself. Mrs. White Conrad was quite insistent that we proceed without delay. Of course she was. I had never understood what my brilliant, kind-hearted son saw in Olivia Conrad with her social media obsession and naked ambition. She'd arrived in Andrew's life like a perfectly calculated missile. A former model turned lifestyle entrepreneur whose Instagram following numbered in the millions. Within 6 months of meeting him at a charity gala, she'd moved into his penthouse. Within a year, they were married. I'd tried to be supportive. Andrew seemed happy, and after losing his father to cancer 5 years earlier, he deserved whatever joy he could find. But there had always been something calculating in Olivia's eyes when she looked at my son, something that measured his worth in dollars rather than devotion. I'll be there, I told the attorney, turning away to hide the fresh tears that threatened. Andrew and Olivia's penthouse overlooking Central Park was filled with people by the time I arrived. Olivia's friends from the fashion world, Andrew's business associates, a few distant relatives I barely recognized. The apartment itself, 5,000 square feet of architectural brilliance that Andrew had purchased shortly before meeting Olivia, had been transformed under her influence from my son's warm, book-filled retreat to a sterile showcase worthy of an interior design magazine. The furniture was all sharp angles and uncomfortable minimalism. The walls adorned with abstract art that conveyed nothing but status. Clara, darling. Olivia air-kissed my cheeks, her smile not reaching her eyes. So glad you could make it. White wine? No, thank you, I replied, resisting the urge to wipe my face where her lips had barely grazed my skin. Suit yourself, she shrugged, turning to greet a tall man in an Italian suit. James, you came. I found a quiet corner, watching the room with growing discomfort. This didn't feel like a post-funeral gathering. It felt like a networking event. People were laughing, exchanging business cards, clinking glasses, as if celebrating rather than mourning. Had they forgotten why we were here? That my son, Olivia's husband, was dead, his body barely cold in the ground? Andrew had died in what the police called a boating accident off the coast of Maine. He'd taken the yacht out alone, unusual for him, and somehow fallen overboard. His body had washed ashore 2 days later. The investigation was ongoing, but the authorities suspected he might have been drinking, though that made no sense to me. Andrew rarely drank, and he never went sailing alone. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeffrey Palmer's voice cut through the chatter as he stood near the marble fireplace. If I could have your attention, please. We're here to read the last will and testament of Andrew Thomas White. The room quieted, people finding seats or leaning against walls. Olivia positioned herself prominently in the center of the largest sofa, patting the cushion beside her for James to join her. I remained standing in my corner, suddenly afraid of what was to come. As per Mr. White's instructions, I'll keep this brief, Palmer began, opening a leather portfolio. This is his most recent will, signed and notarized 4 months ago. 4 months? That was strange. Andrew had always been meticulous about his affairs, updating his will yearly on his birthday. His last birthday had been 8 months ago. What had prompted this change? To my wife, Olivia Conrad White, Palmer read. I leave our primary residence at 721 Fifth Avenue, including all furnishings and art contained therein. Olivia smiled, as if receiving exactly what she expected. I also leave to Olivia my controlling shares in White Technologies, my yacht, Clara's dream, and our vacation properties in the Hamptons and Aspen. Murmurs rippled through the room. This was essentially everything. Andrew had built White Technologies from a small startup to a cybersecurity powerhouse worth billions. Those shares alone represented unfathomable wealth. To my mother, Clara White, I straightened, bracing myself. Would it be the summer house in Cape Cod that we had shared so many memories in? The collection of first edition books we had hunted together at auctions around the world? The vintage car his father had loved? I leave the enclosed item to be delivered immediately following the reading of this will. Palmer reached into his portfolio and withdrew a crumpled envelope, visibly worn as if it had been carried in a pocket for some time. That's it? Olivia's voice carried clearly across the suddenly silent room. The old lady gets an envelope? Oh, Andrew, you sly dog. She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Others joined in, her fashionable friends, several of Andrew's newer business associates, even James, who had his hand casually resting on Olivia's knee in a way that seemed strangely intimate for a funeral day. Palmer approached me, discomfort evident in his expression as he handed me the envelope. Mrs. White, It's fine, I said automatically, the social conditioning of a lifetime forcing politeness through my shock. Thank you. With everyone watching, some openly smirking, I had no choice but to open it there. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, aware of Olivia's predatory gaze. Inside was a single first-class plane ticket to Lyon, France, with a connection to a small town called Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne. The departure was scheduled for the following morning. A vacation? Olivia called out, causing another ripple of laughter. How thoughtful of Andrew to send you away, Clara. Perhaps he realized you needed some time alone. Far, far away. The cruelty was so naked, so deliberate, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Andrew, my brilliant, loving son, had left me nothing but a plane ticket to a place I'd never heard of, while giving everything to a woman who could barely wait until his body was in the ground before mocking his mother. If there's nothing else, Mr. Thing. Palmer, I managed, folding the ticket carefully back into the envelope. Actually, there is one more stipulation, Palmer said, looking uncomfortable. Mr. White specified that should you decline to use this ticket, Mrs. White, any potential future considerations would be nullified. Future considerations? Olivia frowned. What does that mean? I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to explain further, Palmer replied. Those were Mr. White's explicit instructions. Well, it hardly matters, Olivia waved dismissively. There's clearly nothing else of value. Andrew left everything to me. She stood, smoothing her designer dress. I believe this concludes our business. Please, everyone, stay and celebrate Andrew's life. The caterers have prepared his favorite foods. As the gathering returned to its inappropriate festivities, I slipped out unnoticed, the envelope clutched in my hand like the last tenuous connection to my son. In the elevator down to the lobby, I finally allowed the tears to fall. Silent sobs that shook my body as I leaned against the mirrored wall. Why, Andrew? Why would you do this to me? What possible reason could you have for sending me to France and giving everything to a woman who never truly loved you? Back in my modest Upper West Side apartment, the same one I'd lived in since Andrew was a child, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the plane ticket. Saint-Michel de Maurienne meant nothing to me. I'd been to France once, decades ago as a college student, but never to this place. Andrew and I had never discussed it. He'd never shown any interest in that region, yet he'd gone to the trouble of changing his will specifically to send me there, making it clear that I had to go or forfeit some mysterious future considerations. My sensible side said to ignore it, to contact another lawyer, to contest the will, to fight for what should rightfully have been mine. But something deeper, some instinct I couldn't name, told me to trust my son one last time. I pulled out the photo album from the shelf above my desk, the one physical record of our lives together that I refused to digitize despite Andrew's teasing about my ancient technology. As I turned the pages, tracing his growth from a chubby-cheeked toddler to a serious teenager to a confident young man, I tried to make sense of his final message to me. Andrew had always been thoughtful, deliberate in his actions. He wouldn't have done this without reason. The ticket, the strange stipulation about future considerations, the timing of the will change. None of it aligned with the son I knew. Unless he was trying to tell me something. Unless this was part of something bigger. I pulled out my laptop and searched for Saint-Michel de Maurienne, a small town in the French Alps, known for its vineyards and historic chateau. Nothing that connected to our family history or Andrew's interests jumped out at me. My phone rang, startling me. It was Olivia. Clara. Her voice dripped with false concern. I just wanted to check in on you. You left so abruptly. I needed some time alone, I said carefully. Of course, of course. A pause. I was wondering about that ticket. Have you decided whether you'll use it? The question seemed loaded, her interest too keen. I haven't decided yet. Well, as Andrew's widow, I feel responsible for honoring his wishes. If you need help booking a car to the airport or anything at all, that's very thoughtful, Olivia, but I can manage. Are you sure? The flight's early tomorrow, and at your age, traveling alone internationally might be challenging. At my age. As if I were infirm rather than a healthy 62-year-old who'd been traveling independently since before she was born. I've managed far more challenging things, Olivia, but thank you for your concern. After hanging up, I sat motionless, thinking, why was Olivia so interested in whether I took this trip? And why was she being uncharacteristically helpful? In 3 years of knowing her, she'd never once offered me assistance with anything. My instinct that something larger was at play grew stronger. Andrew's insistence through the will. Olivia's unusual interest. Palmer's cryptic comment about future considerations. I looked again at the ticket. A one-way journey to a place I'd never been, departing tomorrow morning. A leap of faith into the unknown. What would I be leaving behind? My apartment, yes. But I owned it outright. My few friends, mostly fellow retired teachers who would understand a sudden trip. No job tied me here since retiring from teaching 3 years ago. And what did I have to lose by going? Nothing but time, and that stretched before me emptily without Andrew. The next morning I packed a single suitcase, called a car service, and headed to JFK Airport. Whatever Andrew had planned, whatever awaited me in Saint-Michel de Maurienne, I would face it. I owed him that much. As the plane lifted off American soil, I gazed out at the receding coastline, feeling as if I were leaving behind not just my home, but the shattered remnants of the life I had known. Ahead lay only questions, an envelope's mystery, and a tiny French village I'd never heard of until yesterday. I'm coming, Andrew. I whispered to the clouds. Whatever you want me to know, I'm coming to find it. The journey to Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne was long and disorienting. After landing in Lyon, I navigated the French railway system with my rusty college French, eventually boarding a regional train that wound its way into the Alps. Outside the window, the landscape transformed from rolling countryside to dramatic mountains that seemed to touch the sky itself. Tiny villages clung to hillsides, church spires and ancient stone buildings standing sentinel over valleys that grew narrower as we climbed higher. What was I doing here? The question repeated itself with each passing mile. What could possibly await me in this remote corner of France that would explain Andrew's bizarre final bequest? By the time the train pulled into the small station at Saint-Michel, my body ached with exhaustion and grief. The platform was nearly empty in the late afternoon light. A few locals, a family with hiking gear, and me, a 62-year-old American widow clutching a crumpled envelope and dragging a suitcase that suddenly seemed far too heavy. As the other passengers dispersed, I stood uncertainly, wondering what I was supposed to do next. Andrew's ticket had brought me here, but there were no further instructions, no clue about where to go or whom to meet. Then I saw him, an elderly man in a crisp black suit and driver's cap, holding a sign with my name written in elegant script, Madame Clara White. Relief washed over me as I approached him. I'm Clara White. The driver, his face weathered by time but his blue eyes remarkably bright, studied me for a long moment. Then, in accented English, he said 5 words that stopped my heart. Monsieur Vincent has been waiting. Vincent. The name hit me like a physical blow, sending me staggering back a step. The driver reached out to steady me, concern crossing his features. Madame, are you unwell? Vincent, I whispered, scarcely able to form the word. Vincent Bennet? The driver nodded, his expression softening. Oui, Monsieur Bennet. He sends his apologies for not meeting you himself, but he thought perhaps it would be too much after your long journey and recent loss. Vincent Bennet was alive. Vincent Bennet was here. Vincent Bennet, the name I had buried so deeply in my heart that I had never spoken it aloud in 40 years. The man I had loved with the fierce passion of youth. The man I had believed dead after that terrible night in Paris. The man who, if my suspicions were suddenly horrifyingly correct, was Andrew's true father. How? I managed, my throat constricting around the word. How did Andrew find him? The driver's eyes widened slightly. I think perhaps Monsieur Bennet should explain. If you'll allow me. He gestured toward a sleek black Mercedes parked nearby. Numbly I followed him, allowing him to take my suitcase and open the car door. As I sank into the leather seat, my mind raced through calculations I had avoided for decades. Andrew had been born 7 months after my hasty marriage to Thomas White. Everyone had assumed he was premature, a common enough occurrence. Only I knew the truth, that he had been conceived in a tiny Paris apartment with blue shutters and a view of the Seine, with a French architecture student who had promised me the world. The driver, who introduced himself simply as Marcel, seemed to sense my need for silence as we left the small town behind, winding up a mountain road bordered by pine forests and breathtaking vistas. Under different circumstances, I might have been captivated by the beauty surrounding us. Now I barely saw it through the fog of memory and fear. We are nearly there, madame, Marcel said eventually, as we turned onto a private road marked only by an elegant wrought iron gate. Chateau Bennet has been in the family for 12 generations, though Vincent has modernized it considerably. Chateau Bennet. The name stirred something in my memory, a midnight conversation, limbs entangled in cheap cotton sheets. Vincent's voice passionate as he described the ancestral home he would someday restore to its former glory. I had laughed then, charmed by what I thought was youthful fantasy. Apparently, it had not been fantasy at all. As we rounded the final bend, the chateau came into view, and I gasped despite myself. Built of golden stone that glowed in the late afternoon sunlight, it was a perfect blend of medieval fortress and elegant manor house. Terraced gardens cascaded down the hillside below it, and beyond them, vineyards stretched into the distance, their neat rows creating patterns across the landscape. "The vineyards produce some of the finest wines in the region," Marcel commented, pride evident in his voice. "Monsieur Bennet is considered one of France's premier vintners now." Of course he was. Vincent had always been brilliant, driven, passionate about everything he touched. While I had retreated into a safe, small life in New York, he had apparently built an empire here in the mountains of his homeland. The car stopped in a circular drive before the chateau's massive oak doors. Before Marcel could come around to open my door, one of the doors swung open, and a tall figure emerged. Time slowed, the moment crystallizing with impossible clarity. Though his hair was now silver instead of midnight black, though lines now mapped his face where once there had been only smooth olive skin, I would have known him anywhere. Vincent Bennet, at 64, was still unmistakably the man I had loved at 20. He stood utterly still, watching me as I emerged from the car on unsteady legs. Neither of us spoke. What could possibly be said after 42 years of silence? What words could bridge the chasm of a lifetime lived apart, of secrets kept and truths hidden? "Clara," he spoke finally, my name in his mouth still carrying the same French inflection that had once made my young heart race. "Vincent." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and breathless. "You're alive." A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, though for many years I believed you might not be." Before I could respond to this bewildering statement, a wave of exhaustion and shock overcame me. The world tilted alarmingly, darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. The last thing I remembered was Vincent rushing forward, his arms still strong despite the years, catching me before I could fall. When I woke, I was lying on a sofa in what appeared to be a study, bookshelves lining the walls, a massive desk by the window, a fire crackling in a stone hearth. Despite the mild spring weather, a blanket had been tucked around me, and someone had removed my shoes. "You're awake!" Vincent's voice came from nearby. He sat in a leather armchair, watching me with an intensity that made me want to hide and draw closer simultaneously. "Marcel has gone to prepare a room for you." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps we should talk first." I sat up slowly, my head swimming with questions. "Andrew," I began, unable to approach any other topic until I knew. "Did he? Was he?" "Your son," Vincent said gently, "came to find me 6 months ago. He had discovered some medical anomalies during a routine physical that led him to question his paternity. Through one of those DNA ancestry services and some skilled private investigators, he traced a genetic connection to me." "So it's true," I whispered, the confirmation of what I had already guessed hitting me with surprising force. "Andrew was your son." Vincent nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "Biologically, yes, but in every way that truly matters, he was raised by you and—" He hesitated. "Thomas died 5 years ago," I said automatically. "He never knew. I never told him that Andrew wasn't his." Andrew explained that. Vincent rose, moving to a sideboard where he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "He said Thomas White was a good father to him." "He was," I confirmed, accepting the glass Vincent offered. The cognac burned pleasantly as I took a small sip. "He loved Andrew as his own. We married quickly after I returned from Paris, and Andrew was born 7 months later. Everyone assumed he was premature, but you knew. You knew he was yours, yet you never tried to find me. The unfairness of this struck me like a slap." "Find you? I thought you were dead, Vincent." After the accident, your roommate told me you died in the hospital. I was 20 years old, pregnant, alone in a foreign country. What was I supposed to do? Vincent went very still. What accident, Clara? The genuine confusion in his voice sent a chill through me. The motorcycle accident. 2 days before I left Paris, you were supposed to meet me at the cafe near the Sorbonne, but you never showed. I went to your apartment and your roommate, Jean something, told me you'd been in a terrible crash, that you'd died from your injuries. There was no accident, Vincent said slowly, his expression darkening. I was at the cafe at the exact time we had arranged. You never came. I waited for hours. When I went to your pension, they said you had checked out that morning, left for America without a word. We stared at each other across 40 years of misunderstanding, the truth dawning with horrible clarity. Paul, Vincent spoke the name like a curse. He was in love with you, though you never noticed. When I went to Marseille to visit my dying grandmother that weekend, he must have... He shook his head as if still unable to believe such betrayal possible. He told me you were dead, and told you I had abandoned you. I finished, the pieces falling into place. To punish us both, I imagine, Vincent said grimly. He wanted you, but you chose me. Rather than accept that, he made sure neither of us could have the other. The enormity of it was almost too much to comprehend. A jealous young man's lie had altered the course of 3 lives, mine, Vincent's, and most tragically, Andrew's, who had grown up never knowing his true father. All these years, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. All these years lost because of a lie. Vincent moved to sit beside me on the sofa, close but not touching. When Andrew found me, I didn't believe him at first. It seemed impossible. But then he showed me your picture, and it was like seeing a ghost. You looked so much like the Clara I remembered, just elegantly matured. He smiled faintly. And Andrew, he had my mother's eyes, my father's chin. Once I saw him, I knew he was telling the truth. Why didn't he tell me he'd found you? I asked, the hurt fresh amid so many other emotions. Why keep it secret? Vincent's expression grew troubled. He wanted to initially, but then he discovered something that changed his plans. Something about his wife. Olivia, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. Yes, he hired investigators to confirm his parentage, but they uncovered something else entirely. Evidence that Olivia was having an affair with his business partner, James. Worse, they found financial irregularities suggesting the two were embezzling from White Technologies, planning to eventually force Andrew out of his own company. James, the man who had sat beside Olivia at the will reading, his hand on her knee in that proprietary way. The pieces were beginning to align into a pattern I didn't want to recognize. Andrew's death, I said, my voice hollow. The boating accident. You don't believe it was an accident at all, do you? Vincent's silence was answer enough. Vincent's silence confirmed my worst fears, crashing over me in waves of horror. Andrew's death, which I'd been trying to accept as a tragic accident, might have been something far more sinister. The police said he fell overboard, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. That he'd been drinking. Andrew never drank when sailing, Vincent said, echoing my own thoughts from the funeral. Never. He was meticulous about safety on the water. It was one of the first things he told me about himself. My hands began to tremble so violently that Vincent gently took the cognac glass from me before it could spill. Are you suggesting that Olivia, that she might have... I don't know, Vincent admitted, his face grave. But Andrew was afraid. The last time I spoke with him, 3 days before his death, he told me he was gathering evidence against Olivia and James, that he had discovered transfers of company funds to offshore accounts, that he planned to confront them, once he had everything documented. And then he died. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. And then he died, I confirmed, out on the water alone, which Andrew told me he never did. He always took a crew member or friend for safety. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to hold myself together as this new reality threatened to shatter me completely. My son, my brilliant, kind-hearted son, might have been murdered by his own wife for money. The same wife who now controlled his entire fortune, who had mocked me at his funeral, who had already been openly flaunting her relationship with James mere hours after we put Andrew in the ground. Why didn't he go to the police? I asked, dropping my hands to look at Vincent. He wanted irrefutable proof first, and Vincent hesitated. He was embarrassed, I think, ashamed that he had been so thoroughly deceived by a woman he thought loved him. That, at least, made painful sense. Andrew had always been private about his emotions, reluctant to show vulnerability. It was a trait he had inherited from his father, his real father, sitting before me now with the same guarded expression I had seen so often on my son's face. "The ticket," I said suddenly, remembering the envelope that had brought me here. "Andrew's will. He planned this, didn't he? He knew something might happen to him." Vincent nodded, rising to retrieve a folder from his desk. "Andrew came to me 4 months ago, shortly after discovering Olivia's betrayal. He revised his will, leaving everything visible to her, the penthouse, the yacht, the shares everyone knew about." He opened the folder, removing several documents. But he had been more careful with his money than anyone realized. The majority of his actual wealth was hidden in investments, properties, and accounts that Olivia and James knew nothing about. He handed me the papers, which I recognized immediately as legal documents. As I scanned them, my breath caught. They detailed a second will, properly executed and notarized, that contradicted everything that had been read at the penthouse. This will left the bulk of Andrew's fortune, a staggering amount that dwarfed even the considerable assets Olivia had inherited, to a trust jointly administered by me and Vincent. "He created a trap," I whispered, understanding dawning as I read further. "He let them think they had everything while actually securing his true legacy beyond their reach," Vincent finished. "Andrew was brilliant, Clara. He knew that if Olivia suspected there was more, she would never stop searching for it. So he created a spectacle. The public will reading your apparent disinheritance, the mysterious ticket that everyone witnessed you receive. To throw her off the scent," I said, the pieces falling into place. "To make her believe she had won, while actually setting in motion his real plan." Vincent's expression softened with pride and grief. "The plane ticket was the key. If you used it, if you came to me, it would activate the second will. If you had refused, everything would indeed have gone to Olivia." I thought back to Palmer's cryptic words about future considerations that would be nullified if I declined to use the ticket. It had been a test of sorts. Would I trust Andrew one last time, even when it seemed he had betrayed me? But why the secrecy? Why not just tell me about you, about the second will? "Andrew said you were a terrible liar," Vincent said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "He feared if you knew the truth, Olivia might see it in your eyes, might realize something was amiss. He wanted her to believe absolutely in her victory." The thought of my son planning all this, protecting me even as he faced unimaginable betrayal, ensuring his true legacy would remain secure, brought fresh tears to my eyes. "There's more," Vincent said gently, drawing another document from the folder. "Andrew left this for you. He asked that I give it to you once you arrived." With trembling fingers, I accepted the sealed envelope, recognizing Andrew's handwriting immediately. Breaking the seal, I unfolded several pages covered in my son's distinctive script. "My dearest Mom, if you're reading this, Then two things have happened. I am gone, and you have trusted me one last time by following my unusual final request. I'm sorry for the public charade at the will reading. I needed Olivia to believe she had won completely. I needed her confidence and arrogance to blossom fully without suspicion that anything lay beyond her grasp. I found Vincent, my real father, through one of those DNA testing services you always refuse to try. I know who my people are, Andrew. I don't need a corporation to tell me. Turns out you were right to be wary, because what I discovered led me down a path I never could have anticipated. At first, I was angry that you had kept the truth from me. That anger led me to seek out Vincent without telling you. But when I found him, when I saw in his face the same features I see in the mirror each day, that anger dissolved into understanding. He told me about Paris, about your whirlwind romance, about the cruel deception that separated you. Neither of you was to blame. I was planning to bring you together to heal this decades-old wound. But then I discovered what Olivia and James were doing, the company funds they were siphoning, the plans they were making to force me out. And suddenly, I needed to be more careful. I needed to protect what I had built, not just for myself, but for you, for Vincent, for the legacy that should have been ours all along. If I die before I can resolve this situation legally, then you must assume the worst. Trust no one except Vincent and Marcel. They know what to do next. The evidence against Olivia and James is stored in the blue lacquer box you gave me for my 16th birthday. I've hidden it where only you would think to look. Remember our treasure hunts when I was small? The place where X always marked the spot. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry for any pain this causes you. But know that in finding Vincent, I found a piece of myself I never knew was missing. I hope that in time you might find the same healing I did. All my love, Andrew. I lowered the letter, my vision blurred with tears. He knew, I whispered. He knew something might happen to him. Vincent reached out hesitantly and took my hand in his. His skin was warm, the touch achingly familiar, despite the decades between our last contact and now. Andrew was trying to protect everyone he loved, he said softly. He spoke of you with such admiration, Clara, such love. He wanted us to have a chance to know each other again, not to rekindle what was lost necessarily, but to heal the wounds caused by that long-ago lie. I looked at our joined hands, then up at Vincent's face. In his features, I could see shadows of Andrew, the shape of his eyes, the angle of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. My son had found his father, had known him for only 6 brief months, and had still managed to forge a bond strong enough to entrust him with this elaborate plan. The blue lacquer box, I said, wiping my tears with my free hand. I know exactly where he would have hidden it. Where? Vincent asked. X marks the spot, I replied, a faint smile forming despite my grief. The garden bench at the Cape Cod house, under the X-shaped trellis where I taught him to identify constellations. It was our special place, our spot where all treasure hunts ended when he was a child. Vincent's expression sharpened. We need to get to that box before Olivia does. If it contains the evidence Andrew gathered against her. She already has the Cape house, I realized with a sinking feeling. It was part of what she inherited. She could find it at any time if she starts going through Andrew's things. Then we must move quickly, Vincent said, rising and pulling me gently to my feet. Marcel can have the jet ready within the hour. The jet, I repeated, momentarily disoriented. Andrew's other jet, Vincent explained with a small smile. The one Olivia doesn't know about. One of many assets he kept hidden from her, including, I might add, a significant ownership stake in this vineyard, which now belongs to you and me. The revelation struck me anew. The depth of Andrew's planning, the extent of his true wealth. the careful way he had arranged for justice, even from beyond the grave. "We're going back to America?" I asked, still trying to process everything. "We're going to get that evidence," Vincent confirmed, his expression hardening with determination. "And then, Clara, we are going to make sure that the people responsible for our son's death face the consequences of their actions." Our son. The words sent a shiver through me. Grief and recognition and something like possibility all tangled together. Whatever came next, I would not face it alone. The same cruel lie that had separated us decades ago had inadvertently brought us back together through the actions of the son neither of us had properly known. As we stepped out of the study, the last rays of sunset illuminated the chateau in golden light, casting our shadows long across the ancient stone floor. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger perhaps, and the painful task of pursuing justice for Andrew. But in that moment, with Vincent's hand still holding mine, I felt something I had not expected to find in this remote corner of France: purpose, and perhaps someday, peace. The Bennett private jet was nothing like any aircraft I'd ever flown in before. All buttery leather and gleaming wood, with just 8 luxurious seats and a small but elegant sleeping cabin at the rear. As we settled in for takeoff, I found myself marveling at this strange new reality where my son had secretly owned such extravagances, where Vincent Bennett had become one of France's wealthiest vintners, and where I, plain Clara White, high school English teacher turned widow, was suddenly thrust into a world of private jets and international intrigue. "The flight to Boston will take about 7 hours, Vincent explained as Marcel, now revealed as not just a driver, but Vincent's trusted right-hand man for over 30 years, prepared for departure. "We should arrive early morning, local time, and then?" I asked, still struggling to grasp our hastily assembled plan. "Then we drive to Cape Cod as quickly as possible." Vincent's expression was grim. Hopefully, Olivia is still in New York, too busy enjoying her newfound wealth to visit the summer house yet. I nodded, my thoughts racing ahead. The box is hidden in a compartment beneath the garden bench. Andrew and I built it together when he was 12, a secret place for his treasures. No one else knows about it. "Let's hope it stays that way for a few more hours," Vincent murmured as the jet began to taxi. As we ascended into the darkening sky, I found myself studying Vincent's profile, noting the changes time had wrought on the young man I had once loved so passionately. The years had been kind to him, silver threading through his once black hair, lines etched at the corners of his eyes and mouth that spoke of laughter as much as age. He was still handsome in that distinctly French way that had captivated me as a 20-year-old American abroad. "You're staring," he observed without turning, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed to be caught. "It's just surreal, all of it." Now he did turn, his dark eyes meeting mine. "Indeed. If someone had told me yesterday that I would be flying to America with Clara Mackenzie—" "White," I corrected automatically. "Of course." A shadow passed over his face. "White, Andrew's father, the man who raised him." The awkwardness of that reality settled between us. Thomas had been a good man, a kind husband, a loving father to Andrew. He had known from the beginning that the child wasn't biologically his, but had never once thrown that fact in my face, even during our worst arguments. He had simply loved Andrew as his own, proud of every accomplishment, supportive through every struggle. "Thomas was a high school science teacher," I said, feeling a sudden need to acknowledge the man who had been my partner for over 30 years. He loved Andrew completely, never once made him feel anything less than wholly wanted, wholly loved. Vincent nodded, his expression softening. Andrew spoke highly of him, said he was patient, encouraging. that he never pushed too hard but always believed Andrew could achieve whatever he set his mind to. That was Thomas, I agreed, my throat tight with unexpected emotion. He was a good man. And you? Vincent asked quietly. Were you happy with him, Clara? The question caught me off guard with its directness. We had a good marriage, comfortable, kind. We were partners, friends. I hesitated, then decided that after 40 years I owed him honesty. We were not what you and I were to each other, but few people ever experience that kind of passion, and passion doesn't always build a stable life. No, Vincent agreed, a hint of sadness in his smile. It does not, though I would have tried had I known you were carrying my child. The weight of what might have been hung between us, a life together, raising Andrew as a family, perhaps other children, a different path entirely from the ones we had walked separately. And you? I asked, turning the question back to him. Did you ever marry? No, Vincent looked out at the darkening clouds below us. There were relationships, of course, some lasting several years, but marriage, it never felt right. He paused, then added so quietly I almost didn't hear. They were never you. Before I could respond to this startling admission, Marcel appeared from the cockpit. We have a secure call from Mr. Palmer, he announced, handing Vincent a satellite phone. He says it's urgent. Vincent took the phone, switching to speaker mode so I could hear. Jeffrey, we're on a secure line. Clara is with me. Thank God. Palmer's voice came through clearly despite the distance. You need to accelerate your plans. Olivia and James were at the office today attempting to access Andrew's private server. When they couldn't, they became agitated. I overheard them mention the Cape House, saying they needed to check the obvious places first. My blood ran cold. They're looking for something. They suspect Andrew had evidence against them. It appears so, Palmer confirmed. And they've already left for Cape Cod. They took the helicopter about 3 hours ago. Vincent and I exchanged alarmed looks. We're still at least 6 hours from Boston, he said, calculating rapidly. Plus another 2 hours to the Cape, even driving at top speed. They'll beat us there, I realized, despair washing through me. They'll find the box. Maybe not, Vincent said, his mind clearly racing. Jeffrey, can you send someone to the house? Create a delay of some kind? I've already dispatched the caretaker with instructions to report a water leak. Shut off the main supply. It should buy you a few hours while plumbers are called, but not much more than that. It will have to do, Vincent decided. We'll call when we land. After ending the call, Vincent instructed Marcel to request permission to increase our speed. Fuel considerations be damned. Then he turned back to me, determination etched in his features. We'll make it, Clara. I promise you. I wished I could share his confidence, but dread had settled in my stomach like a stone. If Olivia and James found Andrew's evidence before we could reach it, not only would justice for our son be compromised, but Vincent and I might find ourselves in danger as well. People willing to murder for millions would certainly not hesitate to eliminate 2 more obstacles. What if, I began, then faltered, the thought too terrible to voice. What if they find it first? Vincent finished for me, reading my fear. Then we moved to contingency plans. Andrew was thorough, Clara. He wouldn't have placed all his evidence in one location. How can you be so sure? I asked. You only knew him for 6 months. Vincent's expression softened. Because he was my son, and apparently he inherited my tendency to prepare for all possibilities. He reached across the aisle, separating our seats, and took my hand. And because he was your son, which means he was both brilliant and meticulous. The simple confidence in his words steadied me. He was right. Andrew had never been careless. Even as a child, he'd had backup plans for his backup plans. If he had gone to the trouble of creating a second secret will, of bringing Vincent and me together, of arranging this elaborate posthumous plan, then he would have safeguarded the evidence in multiple ways. I wish I'd known, I said suddenly, the regret overwhelming me, about you being alive, about Andrew finding you. I wish I could have seen you together, even once. Vincent's fingers tightened around mine. He recorded our first meeting, he said quietly. Set up his phone on the table between us, said he wanted to document the moment. I have it saved. When this is over, when Andrew has justice, I'll show you. The thought of seeing that moment, my son meeting his biological father for the first time, brought fresh tears to my eyes. What had Andrew felt coming face to face with the man whose features he bore? What had Vincent experienced, suddenly confronted with the adult son he never knew existed? So much lost time, so many stolen moments. And at the center of it all, the cruel lie told by a jealous young man 4 decades ago that had altered the course of all our lives. We should rest, Vincent suggested gently. The confrontation ahead may require all our strength. He was right, though I doubted sleep would come easily with my mind racing. Still, I reclined my seat and closed my eyes, Andrew's letter tucked securely in my pocket. Whatever awaited us at the Cape House, I would face it for my son, for the truth, for the justice he had carefully planned but not lived to see executed. And perhaps I admitted to myself as exhaustion finally pulled me toward unconsciousness, for the chance to discover what might still exist between me and the man who had been my first love, the man who was now my unexpected ally in this strangest of journeys. Boston greeted us with a dreary dawn, low clouds, persistent drizzle, and a chill that seeped through my jacket as we descended the stairs from Vincent's jet. A sleek black SUV waited on the tarmac, the driver holding an umbrella and a grim expression. "Mr. Bennett," he nodded as we approached. "Mrs. White, we need to hurry." Inside the vehicle, the driver, who introduced himself only as Robert, brought us up to speed as we navigated the early morning traffic out of the city. "Mr. Palmer called again 30 minutes ago. The plumbing diversion bought you some time, but Olivia and James arrived at the Cape House 4 hours ago. They dismissed the caretaker once the water issue was resolved." "Have they found anything?" Vincent asked sharply. Robert shook his head. "Unknown. The security system Andrew installed allows us to monitor the property's perimeter, but not the interior. We know they're still there, but not what they're doing." I closed my eyes briefly, picturing the Cape Cod house where Andrew and I had spent so many summers. It was smaller than the Manhattan penthouse, more modest in its luxury, but infinitely more personal. Andrew had loved that house, the weathered cedar shingles, the wide deck overlooking the water, the garden where we had spent countless hours together. "They'll search the house first," I said with certainty. "Andrew's office, his bedroom. They won't think to check the garden until they've exhausted the obvious places." "Then we may still have time," Vincent observed, checking his watch. "How much longer until we arrive?" "About 90 minutes in this traffic," Robert replied, maneuvering skillfully through the congested highway. "Less if it clears." Vincent nodded, then turned to me. "We should prepare for all possibilities, Clara. If Olivia and James are there when we arrive, what is our approach?" I hadn't considered this. In my mind, we would somehow slip in unnoticed, retrieve the box, and escape with the evidence. The reality of potentially confronting my daughter-in-law and her lover, my son's possible murderers, sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't know," I admitted. I'm a retired English teacher, Vincent. I don't know how to confront murderers." His hand covered mine briefly. "You are much more than that. You are Andrew's mother. You are stronger than you know." He turned to Robert. "We need a distraction if they're still present, something to draw them away from the property temporarily." Robert nodded. "Already arranged. A delivery of mistakenly addressed furniture is scheduled to arrive at the neighboring house at precisely noon. They'll make enough of a commotion about the confusion that anyone nearby will be drawn to investigate. I marveled at the efficiency of this operation. The private jet, the waiting car, the planned distraction. Had Andrew arranged all this, anticipating every contingency? Or was this Vincent's doing, evidence of the resources at his disposal? As we drove, the cityscape gradually gave way to smaller towns, then to the coastal landscape of Cape Cod. Familiar landmarks appeared. The ice cream shop where Andrew had spent his allowance every Saturday, the bookstore where I had bought him his first astronomy guide, the marina where he had learned to sail. Andrew was everywhere here, his presence lingering in my memories of summers past. And now he was gone, his life cut short by betrayal I still struggled to fully comprehend. Clara. Vincent's voice drew me from my thoughts. Before we arrive, there's something you should know. His expression was troubled. Marcel received a call from our contacts in France while you were sleeping on the plane. They've been monitoring Olivia's financial transactions as Andrew requested. Large sums have been moving from Andrew's accounts, the ones Olivia now controls, to offshore destinations. But more concerning is this. He handed me a tablet displaying what appeared to be a property listing. She's put the Manhattan penthouse on the market, the Cape House as well. She's liquidating everything as quickly as possible, I realized. Once she has everything converted to cash, she and James could disappear, Vincent confirmed, which suggests they are indeed guilty of what Andrew suspected. My grief crystallized into something harder, more focused. This woman had not only potentially murdered my son, but was now erasing every trace of his life, converting his legacy into untraceable funds. The thought was unbearable. We need to stop her, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Not just for justice, but for Andrew. Vincent nodded, something like approval flickering in his eyes. Yes, for Andrew. As we approached the turnoff to the private road leading to the summer house, Robert slowed the SUV, pulling onto a concealed side path. Their vehicle is still on the property, he reported, checking a small device. We'll wait here until the distraction arrives, then proceed on foot through the back path. The back path was a narrow trail through the dunes that led directly to the garden, a road Andrew and I had often taken for our early morning walks to the beach. That it would now serve as our covert approach to retrieve evidence against my son's killers seemed like a terrible perversion of those innocent memories. At precisely noon, Robert received a notification on his phone. The delivery is arriving now. Get ready. From our position, we could just see the neighboring property where a large truck had pulled up. Men in uniform began unloading a substantial amount of furniture, arguing loudly with the confused homeowner. As predicted, the commotion soon drew attention from our target house. Through binoculars, Robert confirmed that both Olivia and James had emerged onto the deck to watch the spectacle unfolding next door. Now, he said simply. Vincent and I slipped from the SUV, following Robert down the familiar sandy path that wound through beach grass and scraggly pines. The rain had tapered to a fine mist, but the ground was still damp, our footsteps thankfully silent on the soft terrain. When the house came into view, my heart clenched at the sight of it, so unchanged outwardly, yet now the scene of a frantic search for evidence by the very people who had betrayed Andrew. We crouched behind a dune, watching as Olivia and James stood on the deck, pointing and conversing about the noisy delivery next door. They'll be distracted for 10 minutes at most, Robert warned. We need to move quickly. I led the way around the perimeter of the property to the garden at the far side, a secluded space enclosed by tall hedges that blocked the view from both the house and neighboring properties. In the center stood the wrought iron bench beneath an X-shaped trellis covered in climbing roses, our special place where Andrew and I had spent countless evenings stargazing. "There," I whispered, pointing to the bench. "The compartment is built into the concrete base. You have to press the third rose detail from the left to release the mechanism." Vincent nodded, and we crept forward, constantly glancing toward the house. The garden was mercifully empty, though signs of recent disturbance, trampled flowers, a displaced garden gnome, suggested Olivia and James had already begun searching here. Kneeling beside the bench, I located the decorative iron rose on the base, an embellishment that looked purely ornamental but was actually an intricate latch. I pressed it firmly, hearing the satisfying click as the hidden compartment released. A small drawer slid outward from the concrete, revealing the blue lacquer box, exactly where Andrew had promised it would be. "You found it," Vincent breathed, relief evident in his voice. "They haven't discovered the hiding place," I confirmed, carefully lifting the box. It was heavier than I remembered, about the size of a thick novel, its surface still pristine despite years in the concealed compartment. "We need to go," Robert urged, his attention fixed on the house. "They're coming back inside." Clutching the box to my chest, I rose to my feet, only to freeze at the unmistakable sound of the garden gate latch opening behind us. "Well?" Olivia's cold voice sliced through the misty air. "Look who decided to join us after all." I turned slowly, the blue lacquer box still clutched against my chest. Olivia stood at the garden gate, James just behind her. The designer funeral outfit was gone, replaced by casual luxury. Cashmere sweater, tailored jeans, boots that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her expression one of amused surprise. "Clara," she drawled, stepping fully into the garden. "What a delightful surprise. And you've brought friends." Her eyes flicked to Vincent, then to Robert, narrowing slightly. "Breaking and entering is a serious crime, you know, especially when the property belongs to me." "This house belonged to Andrew," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "A place he loved, a place where he was happy, and now it belongs to me," Olivia replied with a tight smile. "Along with everything else Andrew owned. Funny how inheritance works, isn't it?" James moved to stand beside her, his hand resting casually in the pocket of his expensive jacket, a posture that somehow seemed more threatening than casual. He was taller than I remembered from the funeral, his features handsome in a predatory way that made my skin crawl. "What's in the box, Clara?" he asked, his voice deceptively gentle. "Something valuable, I assume, given your clandestine little expedition to retrieve it." Vincent shifted subtly, positioning himself between me and the couple. "Mrs. White was retrieving personal items left to her by her son," he said, his accent more pronounced under stress. "Items specifically excluded from the main estate." Olivia laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "And who exactly are you? Clara's gentleman friend? I didn't realize nursing homes allowed day trips for dating purposes." "My name is Vincent Bennett," he replied with dignity. "I am Andrew's father." The statement landed like a physical blow. Olivia's carefully cultivated expression of mocking superiority faltered, genuine shock replacing it momentarily. "That's impossible," she snapped, recovering quickly. "Andrew's father died years ago, Thomas something or other. Thomas White was the man who raised me." A new voice spoke from behind them, causing Olivia and James to spin around. "But he wasn't my biological father." Andrew stood in the garden doorway, very much alive. My knees nearly buckled. The box slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, only Vincent's quick reflexes preventing it from crashing to the ground. I stared at the apparition before me, my son, whom I had buried barely a week ago, now standing just feet away, alive and unharmed. "Andrew?" I whispered, unable to trust my eyes, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hello, Mom," he said, his familiar smile tinged with sadness. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through. It was the only way." Olivia had gone deathly pale, one hand gripping James's arm as if to steady herself. This is impossible. You're dead. We saw your body." "Did you?" Andrew asked, stepping fully into the garden. "Or did you see a body that was identified as mine after spending 2 days in the ocean? A body that required a closed casket funeral due to the condition of the remains?" James's hand moved from his pocket, and I glimpsed the metallic gleam of a gun before Robert smoothly intercepted, disarming him with a quick, professional movement that spoke of specialized training. "I wouldn't," Robert said quietly, securing the weapon. "The property is currently surrounded by federal agents. This conversation is being recorded as evidence." My mind was still struggling to process Andrew's resurrection as he crossed the garden to embrace me. He felt solid, real, his familiar scent enveloping me as he held me tightly. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he murmured against my hair. "I couldn't tell you. It wasn't safe. I needed everyone to believe I was really dead, especially Olivia and James. Their reaction to my death was the final evidence we needed." "I don't understand," I said, pulling back to search his face, the face I thought I would never see again in this life. "An unfortunate John Doe who matched my general description," Andrew explained grimly. "Found 2 days after I supposedly went overboard. The medical examiner was part of the operation. She falsified the identification, listing it as confirmed through dental records." "Operation?" I repeated, still dazed. Vincent placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Andrew contacted me 6 months ago, as I told you. What I didn't tell you was that after confirming I was his biological father, he shared his suspicions about Olivia and James. Together, we took those suspicions to the FBI. I turned to look at Olivia, who had recovered her composure and now regarded us with cold fury. "You were investigating them? All this time?" "For nearly 4 months, Andrew confirmed. "After I accidentally discovered irregularities in the company accounts, transfers that I hadn't authorized, contracts with shell companies that led back to James's offshore holdings. When I dug deeper, I found communications between them discussing how to force me out of my own company." His expression hardened. "And eventually, when that proved too difficult, how to eliminate me entirely." "You have no proof of any of this," Olivia hissed, her beautiful face contorted with hatred. "Nothing that would stand up in court." Andrew smiled thinly. "That's where you're wrong. The blue lacquer box my mother just retrieved contains USB drives with copies of every incriminating email, text, and financial transaction. But more importantly, it contains the listening devices I planted throughout our home after discovering your affair with James, devices that recorded your explicit discussions about having me killed." "That's illegal surveillance," James snapped, his lawyer's instincts emerging even in crisis. "Inadmissible?" "Perhaps in a normal criminal proceeding," agreed a new voice as a distinguished older man in a suit entered the garden. "But when it's part of an authorized FBI operation investigating corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit murder, the rules are somewhat different." "Agent Donovan," Andrew introduced him. "The lead on my case." Olivia's perfect poise finally shattered completely. "This is ridiculous! You faked your own death to frame us? No one will believe this insane story." "They'll believe the evidence," Agent Donovan replied calmly, "which is substantial and growing more damning by the day. Your reactions to Andrew's death have been particularly illuminating. The speed with which you moved to liquidate assets, the offshore transfers, the expedited sale listings for the properties. Not the actions of a grieving widow." As if on cue, additional agents appeared, formally placing Olivia and James under arrest. I watched in stunned silence as they were led away, Olivia's furious accusations fading as they exited the garden. Left alone with Andrew and Vincent, I found myself trembling, the accumulated shock, relief, confusion, and exhaustion of the past week crashing over me at once. Andrew guided me to the bench, sitting beside me while Vincent stood protectively nearby. "I know this is overwhelming," Andrew said gently, "and I can't begin to apologize enough for putting you through the pain of believing I was dead. But I needed everyone to believe it, truly believe it. If Olivia had suspected I was alive, she would have disappeared with everything she could liquidate before we could build a case against her." "The will," I said, pieces starting to fall into place. "The public reading, the envelope sending me to France. It was all part of this plan." Andrew nodded. "I needed to get you safely away from Olivia while creating the impression that you'd been disinherited. If she thought you had nothing, that you posed no threat, she wouldn't bother with you. And I needed you to find Vincent, to understand the full truth about your past, about mine." I looked up at Vincent, who had been watching us with an expression of profound emotion. "You knew Andrew was alive all this time?" "Yes," he admitted. "It was difficult to maintain the deception with you, Clara, but necessary for Andrew's safety." "And the box?" I asked, turning back to Andrew. "Was it really necessary or just another part of the charade?" "Both," Andrew replied. "It contains actual evidence, but we already had copies. What we needed was to catch Olivia and James in the act of searching for it, further proof of their guilt. They've been tearing the house apart for days, looking for anything incriminating I might have left behind." It was almost too much to process. The elaborate deception, the international operation, my son alive after I had mourned him so deeply. And yet, beneath the confusion and lingering hurt of being kept in the dark, a profound relief was taking root. Andrew was alive. Nothing else mattered as much as that miraculous fact. "I have so many questions," I said, reaching up to touch his face, reassuring myself of his solidity. "I know," he acknowledged, "and I promise to answer all of them. But first—" He glanced at Vincent, some unspoken communication passing between them. "I think it's time the three of us had a proper conversation about the past, about the future, about the time we've lost and the time we might still have together." As the agents completed their work around us, securing the property and collecting final evidence, I sat between the two men who shared the same distinctive eyes, the same determined set to their jaw. My son and his father, both returned to me from what I had believed was permanent loss. Outside the garden walls, justice was finally unfolding for those who had conspired against Andrew. But here, in this small sanctuary where I had once taught my son to identify constellations, something else was beginning. The careful, tentative reconstruction of a family fractured 40 years ago by a single malicious lie. We moved from the garden to the house once the agents had finished securing evidence and escorting Olivia and James away. The Cape House, a place filled with so many memories, felt different now, transformed by recent events into something both familiar and strange. Andrew led us to the sunroom overlooking the water, where the three of us sat in awkward silence for several moments, the weight of our shared history and separate pasts hanging between us. "I don't know where to begin," I finally said, looking from Andrew to Vincent and back again. "I buried you. I mourned you. And all this time—" "I know, Mom." Andrew reached for my hand. "Asking you to endure that grief was the hardest part of this whole operation. If there had been any other way—" "Was there?" I interrupted, needing to understand. "Was there truly no other option?" Andrew exchanged glances with Vincent before answering. "We considered alternatives for weeks, but Olivia and James were careful. They used encrypted communications, offshore accounts, cutouts for their most damning conversations. We needed something dramatic to force them into the open, to make them believe they'd succeeded so they would become careless. And my supposed death was the only lever powerful enough, he continued. Once they believed I was gone, they started moving quickly to secure assets, liquidate properties, transfer funds. All actions that created a paper trail we could follow. Vincent leaned forward, his expression earnest. Clara, Andrew fought against this plan initially. He was deeply concerned about the pain it would cause you. It was Agent Donovan who suggested including you in the aftermath operation. Andrew explained. I felt that sending you to Vincent would serve multiple purposes, getting you safely away from Olivia, who might have seen you as a potential threat if you started asking questions, while also giving us the opportunity to reunite you with Vincent after all these years. So the will reading, the envelope, the plane ticket, all theater for Olivia's benefit. Andrew nodded. We needed to create a public perception that you had been disinherited, left with nothing but a mysterious ticket. It made you appear harmless to Olivia's plans while actually setting our real plan in motion. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. The relief of finding Andrew alive warred with the hurt of being kept in the dark, of enduring unnecessary grief. The body, I said suddenly, a disturbing thought occurring to me. You said it was a John Doe. Someone's son is in your grave, Andrew. Someone who deserves to be recognized, to be mourned by their own family. Andrew's expression softened. There is no body, Mom. The casket was weighted but empty. Once this operation is complete, we'll discover that a mistake was made in the identification. The medical examiner's falsified report will be corrected. No one is missing their chance to properly bury a loved one. This at least was a relief. The thought of another mother being denied the chance to mourn her son properly had been momentarily unbearable. So what happens now? I asked, looking between them. Now, Vincent said gently, we have choices to make. All of us. Andrew stood, moving to the window to look out at the ocean. Legally, I'll remain dead until the case against Olivia and James is fully prepared. That could be weeks, possibly months. My resurrection will be explained as part of a federal witness protection operation, which is essentially what it has been. And after that? I pressed. After that? He turned back to face us. I don't know exactly. White Technologies will need restructuring. Many of the board members were complicit in James's scheme, or at least willfully ignorant. The properties can be reclaimed. The assets frozen during the investigation. Unfrozen. He hesitated, then continued more softly. But more importantly, I think the three of us have 40 years of lost time to consider. Connections to rebuild or build for the first time, if that's what you both want. Vincent and I exchanged glances, decades of separation and misunderstanding stretching between us like a chasm that suddenly seemed both vast and crossable. I would like that, Vincent said simply. I have lived most of my life with a space where family should have been. To discover not only that Clara survived, but that I had a son, it has been transformative. However complicated, however difficult the path forward might be, I want to walk it. They both looked at me, waiting. My heart felt too full, torn between joy at Andrew's resurrection and uncertainty about what Vincent's reappearance in my life might mean. I need time, I admitted. This is overwhelming. A week ago, I was a grieving mother planning the rest of my life alone. Now my son is alive. My past has resurfaced in ways I never imagined possible, and everything I thought I knew has been upended. Of course, Andrew said quickly. There's no rush, no pressure. But, I continued, finding my way to the truth as I spoke, I would also like to try to see what might be possible now, between all of us. Relief washed over both their faces. so similar in expression that it struck me anew how clearly Andrew had inherited Vincent's features, his mannerisms. How had I not seen it before, this clear reflection of his biological father? Perhaps, Vincent suggested carefully, we might begin simply, with stories. There are 40 years to account for, after all. And so we did. As afternoon faded into evening, we remained in that sunroom, sharing the lives we had lived separately. Vincent told us of building his vineyard from nearly nothing, of the early struggles and eventual success. I spoke of raising Andrew, of teaching high school English, of my life with Thomas. And Andrew filled in the gaps of his own life, the parts I had witnessed but not fully understood, the recent years when his business success had led him to Olivia, and ultimately to the discovery of his true paternity. Somewhere in those hours of conversation, the awkwardness began to dissolve. We ordered takeout from the local seafood restaurant Andrew and I had frequented during our summers here, eating from cardboard containers while continuing to talk. Agent Donovan called twice with updates. Olivia and James were securely in custody. The evidence from the blue lacquer box was being processed. The case was proceeding smoothly. As night fell, Andrew excused himself to take a longer call from the FBI, leaving Vincent and me alone for the first time since the shocking revelation in the garden. "This is not how I imagined our reunion," Vincent said softly after a moment of silence. "In all my fantasies over the years, and there were many, I never pictured anything like this." "You imagined reuniting with me?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "After all this time?" He smiled, the expression transforming his face to one I recognized from my memories. "Clara, I never stopped hoping I might find you again someday. I searched in the early years, but Clara Mackenzie seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. Because she became Clara White, I realized. And I never used social media, never had much of a public presence." "A ghost I couldn't find," Vincent agreed, "until our son brought us together again." Our son. The word still sounded strange, miraculous. Andrew was Vincent's son, a truth hidden for decades, but now undeniable as I looked at the two of them together. "What do you want from this, Vincent?" I asked directly. "From me? From Andrew? From this unexpected second chance?" He considered the question seriously. "I want whatever is possible, Clara. Whatever you and Andrew are willing to share. I have no expectations, no demands, only gratitude for this opportunity, however it unfolds." His humility touched me. The passionate young man I had loved had grown into a thoughtful, patient adult who understood that relationships couldn't be forced, that trust and connection required time. "One day at a time, then," I suggested, offering a tentative smile. "One day at a time," he agreed, returning the smile with one of his own. Outside, waves crashed against the shore in the familiar rhythm that had been the soundtrack to so many summers here. Inside, three people connected by blood and circumstance began the delicate process of becoming something like a family, unusual, unexpected, but perhaps all the more precious for the long journey that had brought us to this point. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm that had accompanied our arrival completely dissipated. I woke early, disoriented momentarily by the unfamiliar bedroom until I remembered where I was. The Cape House. Andrew alive, Vincent returned from the past. Everything changed in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. I found myself drawn to the kitchen, where decades of habit led me to put on coffee and look for the ingredients to make Andrew's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, a tradition from his childhood summers here. The simple, familiar task grounded me amid the swirling uncertainty of everything else. "Some things never change." Andrew's voice came from the doorway, startling me. "First morning at the Cape House, Mom makes pancakes. I turned to find my son, alive, whole, smiling, leaning against the door frame. The sight still seemed miraculous, impossible. I wasn't sure what else to do, I admitted. Normal seems in short supply right now. He crossed the room to hug me, and I held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary, still needing the physical reassurance of his presence. "I'm sorry," he said as we separated, "for everything you went through. Agent Donovan showed me the footage from the funeral. Seeing you there, believing I was gone." His voice cracked slightly. "It was harder than I expected." "They recorded the funeral?" "Part of building the case. They needed to document Olivia's behavior, her interactions with James." The thought of federal agents surveilling my grief felt invasive, unsettling. This whole operation, it's been planned for months, hasn't it? While I knew nothing. Andrew nodded, taking a seat at the counter as I returned to mixing pancake batter. "Since January, that's when I first found discrepancies in the company accounts. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. When I traced them back to shell companies connected to James, I realized something serious was happening. Why didn't you come to me?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since yesterday's revelations. Why keep me in the dark through all of this? "Initially, I planned to," he said, his expression troubled. "But then I discovered something that changed everything." "What?" "That Olivia and James had hired someone to monitor you, to track your movements, your phone calls. They were concerned you might notice something off in my behavior as I investigated them." I nearly dropped the mixing bowl. "They were spying on me? But why?" "Because you know me better than anyone," Andrew explained. "You've always been able to tell when something's bothering me, when I'm holding something back. They worried you might realize I was suspicious of them, might encourage me to dig deeper." The violation was profound. Strangers watching me, tracking my movements, all because Olivia saw me as a potential threat to her schemes. "That's when I knew I couldn't bring you in," Andrew continued. "It would have put you in danger if they realized you knew what they were planning." He didn't need to finish the thought. If Olivia and James were willing to murder Andrew for his money, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone else who threatened their plans. "But you brought Vincent in," I noted, unable to keep a hint of hurt from my voice as I poured the first pancakes onto the griddle. Andrew had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was complicated. I found him initially because of the DNA test before I discovered what Olivia and James were planning. Once I did realize the danger, I was already in contact with him, and he was safely in France, beyond their reach or awareness." "You trusted him immediately? A stranger?" "Not immediately, no." Andrew smiled faintly. "But there was something about him. Something familiar in a way I couldn't explain at first. And he had resources, connections that proved valuable to the operation. The private jet, secure communications, trusted personnel, like Marcel and Robert." As if summoned by his name, Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway, hesitating as if uncertain of his welcome in this domestic scene. "Good morning," he said, his accent more pronounced with sleep. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. I'm making pancakes." "A tradition, Andrew tells me," Vincent said as he poured himself a cup. "One of many I have missed." The simple acknowledgement of all he had missed, all we had both missed through our decades of separation, hung in the air between us. "There will be new traditions," Andrew suggested carefully. "Different ones, perhaps, but still meaningful." Vincent nodded, taking a seat beside Andrew at the counter. The resemblance between them was even more striking in the morning light. The same profile, the same way of holding their coffee cups, the same thoughtful pause before speaking. "Agent Donovan called," Vincent informed us. "Olivia and James are being formally charged today. The evidence from the blue lacquer box has been analyzed and appears quite damning. Recordings of them explicitly discussing plans to eliminate Andrew, financial documentation of the stolen funds, even communications with the person they hired to sabotage the yacht. They actually hired someone? I asked, horrified anew at the calculated nature of their plan. Andrew nodded grimly. A mechanic who created what would have appeared to be an accidental equipment failure if I had actually taken the yacht out that day. The FBI intercepted him before he could complete the job and convinced him to cooperate. So you never were in danger on the water, I realized, flipping the pancakes perhaps more forcefully than necessary. No, Andrew confirmed, though the plan to fake my death was real. We needed Olivia and James to believe they had succeeded in order to gather the final evidence against them. I began plating the pancakes, the familiar ritual at odds with the extraordinary conversation. And now, how long before you can officially return from the dead? A few weeks, most likely, Andrew replied. There are legal considerations, protocols for witness protection cases, and we need to ensure the charges against Olivia and James are fully secured before I emerge. And in the meantime? I asked, setting plates before them both. In the meantime, Vincent said carefully, I was hoping you might consider visiting Chateau Bennett again, both of you. There is much of Andrew's heritage, his French heritage, that he has yet to discover, and perhaps... He hesitated, then continued with deliberate casualness. Perhaps it might be a good place for all of us to become better acquainted, away from the complications here. The invitation hung in the air, not just a suggestion for a visit, but an opening to something more, a chance to explore what might still exist between Vincent and me after all these years, an opportunity for Andrew to connect with his biological father's world, his history, his legacy. I'd like that, Andrew said, looking between us, once the immediate legal matters are settled. The vineyard was extraordinary. I'd like to see more of it, understand more about that part of my history. They both looked at me, waiting. I busied myself with the remaining pancake batter, buying time to consider. The thought of returning to France, of spending extended time with Vincent at his chateau, brought a complex mixture of feelings. Anticipation, anxiety, a flutter of something that felt dangerously like hope. I'll think about it, I said finally, not ready to commit but unwilling to refuse outright. There's still so much to process here first. Vincent nodded, accepting my hesitation without pressing. Of course. There is no rush, Clara. Only an open invitation, whenever you might wish to accept it. As we ate breakfast together, this strange new family unit formed from decades-old secrets and recent revelations, I found myself studying both men surreptitiously. My son, whom I had raised and loved for 38 years. His father, whom I had loved briefly but intensely in my youth. The connections between them were unmistakable now that I knew to look for them. Genetic echoes that had always been there, unrecognized until now. Whatever came next, whether a visit to France, a gradual rebuilding of relationships, or paths that ultimately diverged again, at least it would be founded on truth, rather than lies. The deception that had separated Vincent and me 40 years ago, and the more recent deceptions orchestrated by Olivia and James, would no longer shape our lives. For now, that knowledge, and the miraculous reality of Andrew alive across the table, was enough. 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Andrew remained officially dead while the case against Olivia and James solidified. The evidence from the blue lacquer box proved even more damning than anticipated. Not only recordings of their explicit plans to murder Andrew, but documentation of systematic embezzlement stretching back nearly 2 years. Agent Donovan kept us updated on the proceedings, which moved with surprising speed once Olivia's carefully constructed facade cracked under interrogation. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against her, she turned on James, offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. James, in turn, implicated several board members who had knowingly assisted in the financial fraud. The scandal expanded daily, making headlines in financial papers and eventually mainstream news. Through it all, the three of us remained at the Cape House, sheltered from the media storm by federal agents who maintained a security perimeter around the property. It was a peculiar time, part family reunion, part witness protection, part emotional reckoning. As we navigated our complex connections, Vincent and I settled into a cautious friendship, neither of us pushing for more, but both aware of the unresolved feelings that sometimes surfaced in quiet moments. We took long walks on the beach, comparing the lives we had lived separately, filling in 40 years of history and fragmentary conversations that often circled back to Andrew. "He has your intelligence," Vincent observed one afternoon as we watched Andrew on a video call with federal prosecutors, his quick mind dissecting complex financial transactions with remarkable clarity. "And your moral compass. He could have simply divorced Olivia when he discovered her affair, walked away with his fortune intact. Instead, he risked everything to ensure justice was served." "He has your determination," I countered. "Once he sets a course, nothing deters him. And your eyes, your hands, even the way you both gesture when explaining something complicated." These moments of shared pride in our son bridged the decades of separation, creating a tentative foundation for whatever might come next. Andrew, for his part, seemed to be enjoying this unexpected time with both his parents. He shared stories from his childhood that I had almost forgotten, asked Vincent about family history in France, and occasionally orchestrated situations where Vincent and I found ourselves alone together. His matchmaking intentions transparent but oddly touching. "You know what he's doing?" I said to Vincent one evening after Andrew had suddenly remembered an urgent call he needed to make, leaving us alone on the deck with a bottle of wine from the Bennett Vineyard. "Of course," Vincent replied with a small smile. "He is not subtle. Does it bother you?" Vincent considered the question, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass thoughtfully. "That our son wishes to see us happy? No. That he perhaps has overly romantic notions about rekindling a 40-year-old love affair? Perhaps a little. We're different people now." I agreed. "The Clara and Vincent who fell in love in Paris don't exist anymore." "No, they don't," he acknowledged. "But perhaps the people we have become might find their own connection if given the chance. Different, but no less meaningful for being built on experience rather than youthful passion." His directness took me by surprise, though it shouldn't have. Vincent had always possessed a refreshing honesty, an ability to speak truth without artifice. "Is that what you want?" I asked, equally direct. "I want the opportunity to find out," he replied simply. "No expectations, no pressure, just time to discover who we are to each other now, beyond Andrew's parents, beyond our shared past." Before I could respond, Andrew reappeared, his expression unusually serious. "Agent Donovan just called. The prosecutors have reached plea agreements with both Olivia and James. The case is essentially closed." "What does that mean for you?" I asked, sensing the weight behind his announcement. "It means," he said, taking a seat between us, "that my resurrection has been scheduled for next week. A press conference explaining that my death was staged as part of a federal operation to catch embezzlers and would-be murderers." "And after that?" Vincent prompted gently. Andrew took a deep breath. "After that, I need to rebuild. The company will require extensive reorganization. The board will need new members. Trust will need to be restored with investors, clients, employees." He paused, then continued more hesitantly. "I've been thinking about what comes next personally as well, about what matters most after coming so close to losing everything." "And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked, recognizing the thoughtful expression he wore when making important decisions. That life is too short for missed opportunities and unspoken truths. He looked between us. I've decided to accept Vincent's invitation to spend time at Chateau Bennett. Not just a visit, but an extended stay. Perhaps 6 months. I stared at him, surprised. 6 months? What about the company? I can manage most aspects remotely with occasional trips back to New York as needed. And frankly, after everything that's happened, some distance from White Technologies might be healthy for me and for the organization. He took both our hands, creating a physical connection between the three of us. I'd like you to join me, Mom, to come to France, to spend time getting to know the other half of my heritage, to see if there might be a place for you there as well, in whatever capacity feels right. The invitation hung in the air, freighted with meaning beyond the simple words. This wasn't just about a trip to France, about exploring Andrew's paternal heritage. It was about the possibility of something new between Vincent and me, something unrushed, unpressured, but potentially profound. You don't need to decide immediately, Vincent added, seeing my hesitation. The invitation remains open whenever you might feel ready. Later that night, alone in my room, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking the moonlit beach where Andrew and I had spent so many summer evenings. The familiar landscape seemed different now, transformed by recent revelations and resurrections. Everything had changed. Andrew was not just my son, but Vincent's as well. He carried a heritage I had denied him knowledge of for 38 years. A connection to a culture and family history that was rightfully his to claim. And Vincent was no longer a painful memory of love lost, but a living, breathing man whose life had taken its own path parallel to mine, only to converge again through our son. Could there still be something between us after all this time? Not the rekindling of youthful passion, as Vincent had rightly noted, but something new built on who we had become in the intervening decades. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I watched the waves crashing against the shore, I realized that whatever choice I made would irrevocably alter the course of my life. Staying in New York meant returning to the familiar, the comfortable. Going to France meant stepping into the unknown, taking a risk on possibilities that might come to nothing, or might lead to something I hadn't even allowed myself to imagine. The envelope that had started this journey, the plane ticket to Saint-Michel that had seemed like such a cruel joke at the funeral, now represented a choice rather than a command, a choice to explore what might still exist between Vincent and me, what new relationships might form among the three of us as a most unusual family. With sudden clarity, I realized there was really only one choice I could make, the one that honored not just the past we had shared, but the future we might still create together. Decision made, I turned from the window to begin packing for France. The press conference announcing Andrew's resurrection was as surreal as the funeral had been. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. The official narrative carefully presented by Agent Donovan, with Andrew standing solemnly at his side. I watched from a secured room, Vincent beside me, as my son explained to the world that his death had been temporarily falsified as part of an elaborate operation to catch those who had conspired against him. The media frenzy that followed was intense but mercifully brief. The story of betrayal, fake death, and justice served was irresistible to news outlets, but the legal gag orders surrounding the ongoing prosecutions limited what could be reported. Within days, newer scandals had pushed us from the headlines, allowing a tentative return to something resembling normal life. For Andrew, normal now meant extensive meetings with the White Technologies Board, reassuring key clients, and restructuring the company leadership. For me, it meant finalizing arrangements for an extended absence, subletting my apartment, notifying friends, forwarding my mail. For Vincent, it meant returning briefly to France to prepare for our arrival, to inform his staff and business partners that he would be hosting his son and his son's mother for an extended visit. "Are you sure about this?" Andrew asked the night before our departure, finding me on the deck of the Cape House where I sat watching the sunset one last time. 6 months is a long commitment. "I'm sure," I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt. I spent 40 years wondering what happened to Vincent. I spent a week believing I had lost you forever. A few months exploring what might still be possible for us, all of us, feels like a gift rather than a sacrifice. He settled into the chair beside me, his expression thoughtful. "And if nothing comes of it, if you and Vincent decide there's no future there, then I'll have had the opportunity to know for certain, rather than always wondering what might have been," I said simply. "And I'll have spent time with my son in a beautiful place, learning about half of his heritage that I never allowed him to explore." Andrew smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "For what it's worth, I think there's still something there between you and Vincent. I see it when you look at each other, even if neither of you is ready to admit it yet." "We'll see," I said non-committally, though his words triggered a flutter of something hopeful in my chest. "We have time now. Time we never thought we'd have." The journey to France was considerably more comfortable than my first frantic trip after the funeral. Vincent's private jet provided space to rest, to think, to prepare myself for whatever lay ahead. Andrew spent much of the flight working on his laptop, reorganizing white technologies remotely, while I alternated between reading and gazing out at the endless blue sky, marveling at the strange path that had led me here. When we landed in Lyon, Marcel was waiting with the same black Mercedes, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of Andrew and me together. "Welcome back, Madam White," he said with a formal bow that couldn't quite conceal his genuine pleasure. "Monsieur Bennet is awaiting your arrival at the chateau." The drive through the French countryside was different this time, the landscape no longer obscured by grief and shock, the beauty of the Alps fully visible in the clear autumn light. Andrew pointed out landmarks he had noticed during his previous visit, his excitement building as we approached Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne. "The vineyard stretches for nearly 300 acres, he told me, leaning forward in his seat. "Some of the vines are over a century old. Vincent's grandfather started with just 50 acres, and each generation has expanded it. The Bennett wines have won international awards for decades." His pride in this newly discovered heritage was palpable, touching something deep in my heart. For all my efforts to give Andrew everything, there had been this essential piece of his identity that I had withheld, not maliciously, but through my own unresolved grief and misunderstanding. As we rounded the final bend, Chateau Bennet came into view, golden in the late afternoon sun, just as it had been on my first arrival. This time, however, Vincent stood waiting at the entrance, his tall figure immediately recognizable even at a distance. The car had barely stopped before Andrew was out, striding forward to embrace his father with an ease that spoke of the connection they had already formed during their brief time together. I followed more slowly, taking in the tableau they created, so clearly related, so comfortable together despite the decades of separation. "Clara," Vincent said as I approached, his smile warming his entire face. "Welcome back." "Thank you for having us," I replied, suddenly shy in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Come." He gestured toward the massive oak doors. "Everything is prepared. I thought perhaps a simple dinner tonight after your journey. Tomorrow, if you feel up to it, I can begin showing you the vineyard, the winery, the village." The interior of the chateau was as impressive as I remembered. Soaring ceilings, ancient stone walls softened by elegant furnishings, windows framing spectacular mountain views. But now, without the shock and confusion of my first visit, I noticed other details. Family photos arranged on a side table, books in multiple languages filling built-in shelves, fresh flowers and crystal vases throughout the entry hall. "This is home," Vincent said simply, following my gaze. "Not just a historic property or a business headquarters. This is where generations of Bennetts have lived, loved, raised their families." The implications of his words hung in the air between us, that this could be Andrew's heritage too. Perhaps in some way not yet defined, mine as well. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "I can see why you fought so hard to restore it, to build the vineyard into what it is today." "Let me show you to your rooms," he offered. "You'll want to rest before dinner." The suite he had prepared for me was on the chateau's second floor, with windows overlooking the vineyards that stretched toward distant mountains. Everything had been thoughtfully arranged: fresh flowers on the dressing table, a selection of books beside the bed, a carafe of water and basket of local fruit on a small table by the window. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Vincent said from the doorway. "If you need anything at all, you have only to ask." "It's perfect," I assured him, moving to the window to take in the spectacular view. "More than perfect." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you came, Clara. Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us, I'm grateful for this time." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to settle into this new space, this new chapter of my life that had begun with a crumpled envelope and a plane ticket I never expected to use. Later, as the three of us gathered for dinner in a cozy room that felt more like a family dining area than the formal spaces I had anticipated, I watched Andrew and Vincent discussing vineyard operations, vintage variations, the challenges and rewards of winemaking, their shared passion, their similar mannerisms, the easy rapport they had established in such a short time. It was everything I had denied them for decades, everything I had never allowed myself to imagine might be possible. "To new beginnings," Vincent proposed as we raised our glasses, filled appropriately with Bennett wine from the year Andrew was born, a vintage Vincent had apparently saved for just such an occasion. "To truth," Andrew added, his gaze moving meaningfully between us. "To family," I completed, the word encompassing everything we had lost, everything we had found, everything we might yet become. As we clinked glasses, I felt something settle within me, a rightness, a sense of pieces finally falling into their proper places after decades of misalignment. Whatever grew from this time in France, whether friendship, romance, or simply a healed understanding between three people connected by blood and circumstance, it would be authentic in a way our separate lives had not been. The crumpled envelope that had seemed like such a cruel joke at the funeral had actually contained the greatest gift imaginable. Not just a plane ticket to France, but a passage to truth, to reconciliation, to possibilities I had long since abandoned. And for that, despite all the pain and deception that had preceded it, I found myself profoundly grateful. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm I hadn't experienced before, a blend of discovery, reunion, and healing that slowly transformed our tentative connections into something stronger. Vincent showed us every aspect of the vineyard and winery, teaching Andrew the business that might someday be part of his inheritance, sharing family history and traditions that had been lost to both of us. I explored the village of Saint-Michel, my rusty French improving with daily practice, discovering small shops and cafes where the locals soon greeted me by name. On my own initiative, I began volunteering at the local library, helping with English language programs and finding unexpected joy in teaching again, even informally. Andrew divided his time between learning the vineyard operations and managing white technologies remotely. He seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years, the weight of deception and danger lifted from his shoulders. In the evenings, the three of us often gathered in Vincent's study, sharing stories, playing chess, or simply enjoying comfortable silence together. 1 month into our stay, Vincent invited me to join him for a walk through the oldest section of the vineyard, rows of gnarled vines that had been producing grapes since his grandfather's time. "I've been meaning to show you something," he said as we followed a path between the vines, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the hillside. "Something I think you might find interesting." He led me to a small stone building nestled among the oldest vines, a structure that looked as ancient as the chateau itself. "This was the original winery," he explained, unlocking the weathered wooden door. "Now we use it mainly for storage, but I've kept one section for a special project." Inside, the air was cool and slightly musty, with the rich scent of aged wood and earth. Vincent guided me through stacks of equipment to a back room, where to my surprise I saw walls covered with photographs, hundreds of them, arranged chronologically. "Vincent, what is this?" I asked, stepping closer to examine the images. "My life," he said simply, "or rather the parts of my life that should have included you and Andrew." I moved along the wall, taking in the photographs. Vincent as a young man, not much older than when I had known him, standing proudly in front of the newly renovated chateau. Vincent in his 30s, accepting an award for his wines. Vincent with his parents, with business associates, with friends. But always, in every group photo, there was a noticeable space beside him, a deliberate emptiness that spoke volumes. "I left room for you," he said quietly, coming to stand beside me. "Even when I believed you were gone forever, I could never quite bring myself to fill that space with someone else." The simple confession touched me more deeply than any grand declaration might have. This quiet testimony to 40 years of carrying an absence, the same absence I had carried in my own way. "I did the same," I admitted, turning to face him. "Not with photographs, but in my life. Thomas knew it. He accepted it. There was always a part of me that remained untouched, reserved for a ghost." "And now the ghost has substance," Vincent said softly. "But that doesn't mean he can simply reclaim that space. We are different people now, as we've acknowledged." "Yes," I agreed. "But perhaps these new people might still find their way to each other." Vincent's eyes held mine, searching. "Is that what you want, Clara?" Instead of answering with words, I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his, a gesture both familiar and entirely new, connecting our past to whatever future we might build. We stood that way for several moments, neither rushing to define what this might mean, both content for now with the simple acknowledgement of possibility. Later that evening, Andrew found us still in the old winery, now sitting side by side on an ancient bench, looking through a box of old letters and mementos Vincent had preserved. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, leaning against the doorframe with a smile that suggested he understood exactly what was happening. "Vincent has been showing me his archives," I explained, holding up a faded concert program from the Paris Opera, a performance we had attended together in that brief, magical summer so long ago. "I see," Andrew's smile widened. "And have you found what you were looking for?" I exchanged a glance with Vincent, seeing my own cautious hope reflected in his eyes. "We're finding our way," I said simply. Andrew nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Then I won't intrude. Dinner whenever you're ready. I've already started preparing something." After he left, Vincent turned to me with a raised eyebrow. "When did he learn to cook?" I laughed, the sound echoing in the small stone room. "He took classes after college, said he was tired of takeout. He's actually quite good." "Another talent he didn't inherit from me," Vincent chuckled. "The kitchen has never been my domain." "Nor mine," I admitted. "Thomas was the cook in our family. I wonder if Andrew learned from him." The easy way we could now speak of Thomas, acknowledging his importance in Andrew's life without tension or jealousy, marked how far we had come in just a few weeks. The past was being woven into our present rather than standing as a barrier between us. Vincent carefully returned the program to its box, his movements deliberate. Clara, I want you to know that I don't expect anything. This time together, it's a gift I never thought to receive. If friendship is all that grows between us, it will still be more than I dared hope for most of my life. I know, I said, touched by his consideration. But I think we both sense there might be more, and I'm not afraid to discover what that might be. He smiled then, the full, unguarded smile that had captured my heart so many years ago. Then we'll discover it together, one day at a time. We walked back to the chateau hand in hand, the setting sun painting the vineyards in shades of gold and amber, a metaphor for this autumn season of our lives, rich with the promise of a harvest neither of us had expected to reap. 2 months passed, then 3, each day adding another thread to the fabric of our emerging life together. Autumn faded into winter, the vineyards turning stark and beautiful against occasional dustings of snow. The chateau, with its thick stone walls and massive fireplaces, became a warm sanctuary against the mountain cold. Andrew adapted to life in France with surprising ease, dividing his time between the vineyard and his remote management of white technologies. The distance seemed to give him perspective on the company, allowing him to reshape it according to his true vision rather than the aggressive growth model that James had pushed. "I've been thinking," he told us one evening as we sat before the fire in Vincent's study, "about the future of the company." "What kind of changes are you considering?" Vincent asked, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Andrew leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I want to split the company. Keep the core cybersecurity business, but spin off the consumer products division. It's grown too large, too impersonal, and I want to relocate the headquarters." "Leave New York?" I asked, surprised. Andrew nodded. "I'm considering Boston, or possibly establishing a significant presence here in France. The European market is untapped for us, and with the EU's growing focus on data protection, our security expertise would be valuable." "France?" Vincent couldn't hide his pleasure at the thought. "You would consider making this a permanent base?" "I'm more than considering it," Andrew admitted. "These past months have shown me what I've been missing. Connection. Purpose beyond just building a bigger company. Being part of something with deeper roots than quarterly earnings." He gestured toward the window, where even in the darkness, the presence of the vineyards could be felt. "What you've built here, Vincent, it's not just a business. It's a legacy. It's something that connects generations. I want that for white technologies, or whatever it might become." I watched my son, this thoughtful man who had faced death and deception and emerged with a clearer vision of what truly mattered, and felt a surge of pride so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. "Whatever you decide," I said, "we'll support you." The "we" slipped out naturally, an unconscious acknowledgement of how Vincent and I had gradually become a unit again, different from our youthful romance, but no less real. We exchanged a glance, his eyes warming with recognition of the same thought. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. An unusual occurrence at this hour. Marcel appeared in the doorway, his expression apologetic. "Forgive the interruption, but there is a delivery. The courier says it requires immediate attention." Vincent frowned. "At this hour? What could be so urgent?" Marcel presented a small package on a silver tray. "It is addressed to all 3 of you." Andrew reached for the package, a simple brown paper parcel with our 3 names written in an unfamiliar hand. "No return address," he observed, examining it carefully before opening it. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Andrew unfolded the paper, reading aloud. "To the White Bennett family, you don't know me, but I worked for James Reynolds for 5 years as his assistant." I was unaware of his criminal activities until the scandal broke. While organizing his files for the prosecutors, I discovered this drive hidden in a secret compartment of his desk. "I believe it contains information that belongs to you. I've made my statement to the FBI, but I wanted you to have this directly. Mr. White's kindness to me over the years deserves at least this much loyalty. With respect, Lisa Chen. Andrew looked up, his expression puzzled. Lisa was always efficient, but I wouldn't have called us close. What's on the drive? I asked, leaning forward. Andrew moved to Vincent's laptop on the desk, inserting the USB. After a moment of loading, his sharp intake of breath drew us both to his side. It's a video file, he said softly, time-stamped the day I confronted Olivia and James. With a shared look of trepidation, we watched as Andrew clicked play. The screen showed James's office at White Technologies, the view apparently from a hidden camera. James sat behind his desk, Olivia pacing before him. He knows, she was saying, her voice tight with tension. Andrew knows everything. He showed me the offshore account records. He's going to the board, then the police. James remained calm, adjusting his cufflinks. Then we accelerate the plan. The yacht is ready. The mechanic has already made the modifications. It's too soon, Olivia protested. We don't have everything in place. We have no choice, James snapped. Unless you prefer prison. Let me remind you that your fingerprints are all over this, Olivia. Every transfer, every fraudulent document, you signed off on all of it. The video continued, documenting in explicit detail their plan to eliminate Andrew, the sabotage of the yacht, the falsified accident report they had already prepared, how they would handle the aftermath and take control of the company. When it ended, the three of us sat in stunned silence. They recorded it, Andrew finally said, his voice hollow. They actually recorded their own murder plot. James was always meticulous about documentation, Vincent observed grimly. Perhaps he wanted leverage over Olivia if things went wrong. This is the final piece, I said. With this, there's no possibility of plea deals or reduced sentences. They'll face the full consequences of what they planned. Andrew nodded, already reaching for his phone. I need to call Agent Donovan immediately. As he stepped into the hallway to make the call, Vincent and I remained by the laptop, the frozen image of Olivia and James still visible on the screen. It's finally over, I said softly. The truth is completely in the open now. Vincent took my hand, his touch reassuring. And not just about them. About all of us, too. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the truth we're building together. I leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. It feels like coming full circle, as if everything that was broken is finally being mended. Andrew returned, his expression relieved. Donovan says this is exactly what they needed. There will be new charges filed tomorrow. Neither of them will see freedom for a very long time. Good, Vincent said firmly. Justice for what they plan to do to you, to all of us. Andrew closed the laptop, physically shutting away the images of betrayal. I don't want to think about them anymore. They've taken up enough of our lives. He moved to stand before the fire, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. I've made my decision. I'm going to establish European headquarters here in France. Not in Paris or Lyon, but right here in Saint-Michel. Are you sure? I asked. It's a significant change. Andrew turned to face us, his expression more certain than I had seen it in months. I've never been more sure of anything. White Technologies needs to be more than just my company. It should be our legacy, connecting what Vincent has built with what I've created. The White Bennett legacy. The name hung in the air between us. A bridge spanning generations, connecting past to future. I looked at Vincent, seeing the same emotion in his eyes that I felt in my heart. Pride, hope, and deep gratitude for this second chance none of us had expected. The White Bennett legacy, Vincent repeated, the words carrying the weight of promise. I like the sound of that. Later that night, as Vincent and I walked along the moonlit terrace overlooking the sleeping vineyards, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. If someone had told me 4 months ago that I would be here, I said, I would never have believed it possible. Vincent smiled, his arm warm around my shoulders against the winter chill. Life rarely follows the paths we expect. Sometimes it takes a painful detour to bring us where we truly belong. I thought of the crumpled envelope at Andrew's funeral, the plane ticket that had seemed like a final rejection, but had actually been the beginning of everything. When I got on that plane, I admitted, I had no idea what awaited me here. I only knew I had to trust Andrew one last time. And now? Vincent asked softly. I turned to face him, no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. Now I know exactly where I belong. If you'll have me, Vincent Bennett, I'd like to stay. Not just for these 6 months, but for whatever time we have left. His eyes shone in the moonlight, his smile tender as he drew me closer. Clara White, I've been waiting 40 years to hear those words. This place has always held a space for you, as has my heart. Our kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a passion, the beginning of something new rather than a rekindling of what had been lost. We were not the young lovers of Paris anymore, but something perhaps more valuable, partners who had found each other again across time and tragedy, wiser now, more patient, more appreciative of the precious gift we had been given. As we walked back into the chateau, into the home that would now be ours together, I felt a sense of completion I had never expected to find. The circle that had been broken 40 years ago by a cruel lie had finally closed, bringing all 3 of us to exactly where we belonged. Andrew was waiting in the grand entrance hall, a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses in hand. I saw you from the window, he explained with a smile that told me he understood exactly what had transpired between us. I thought we might have something to celebrate. Vincent drew me close to his side, his arms secure around my waist. Indeed we do. Your mother has agreed to make France her home. Andrew's smile widened as he began working the cork free. Then it's official. The White Bennett family is finally complete. As the champagne flowed and we toasted this new beginning, I marveled at the strange, wonderful path that had led us here. From a funeral to a resurrection, from deception to truth, from separation to reunion, each painful step had been necessary to reach this moment of wholeness. The inheritance Andrew had left me was far more precious than any material wealth. It was the gift of completion, of family restored, of love reclaimed. And as I stood between the 2 men who shared not just DNA but a profound connection of spirit, I knew that this inheritance would sustain us through whatever challenges still lay ahead. To family, I proposed, raising my glass. To truth, Vincent added. To second chances, Andrew completed. Our glasses clinked in the warm light of our shared home, the sound echoing like a promise through the ancient halls of Chateau Bennett. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.